Thank you guys for sharing. Excited to partner with you. For the next month or so, we'll be talking about this through our services. And so, yeah, meet them in the lobby afterwards, find out more about who they are and what's going on with this. But again, my name is Jonathan. I get to be the lead pastor here, and I have too many things on my stand here. In fact, I was missing my actual iPad stand. So we're good now. Don't worry. We're good. And today, we're actually jumping into a new series. So last week, we had Mother's Day, which was an amazing time to just hear about the love of mothers and what does that look like. But today, we're starting a new series called The One Another Effect. And the one thing I know about one another is that every single one of you has a one another in your life. Meaning you have people in your life that you have to learn to love and care about, and sometimes you don't want to, but you kind of have to. You know, there's those kinds of people in your lives. And today, as we're looking at the one another effect, we're looking at how we live in relationship to each other. It actually determines what our lives become and how the world around us changes. So by the way that we treat one another, the world will actually take notice. Our lives will actually be different. Our church community is going to look different. And I was thinking about this as I got into this, that there are 31 verses in the New Testament that use that phrase, one another. That's a lot of verses that say, what does it look like to live with one another? So do you think it's important to God how we treat each other? Yeah, of course it is, right? It's so important. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to look at what we can do as a Christian community to look different than the rest of the world and to love one another, to care for one another, to encourage one another. I don't know about you guys, but growing up, I had some unspoken house rules. Do you guys have any actual spoken house rules? Like they're written down somewhere, they're above your kitchen table maybe? Anybody? Written? No? None of you? Okay. All of you have unspoken rules, right? Things like, hey, we take our shoes off when we get into my house, right? Or, hey, we make sure to treat each other with kindness and respect. Or we say we're sorry quickly. Or we like to go to dinner, or we only do dinners around the table. Or whatever it might be, you have house rules, the ways that we as a family do this thing. And the thing is that the church also has house rules, the ways that we're supposed to interact with one another. God actually gives us house rules. Hey, this is what our family looks like. And so that's what we're going to be looking at through this series is what does it look like to live as the family of God with the rules of God, to treat one another as God would want us to treat one another. And so we're going to look at things like encouraging one another, inspiring one another, carrying each other's burdens. And today we're actually looking at the easiest one another of them all, and that is the one another of forgive one another. That's not easy. Okay, I was expecting a little bit more of a chuckle or something. Do you guys enjoy forgiving? That's awesome. I have such a hard time with it. Man, I don't know about you, but forgiveness is one of those things that I'm like, I wish I could. You know, I really wish I could. But I don't know how to. And so that's actually what we're going to be looking at today. Because the thing is, we all have stories where we've needed forgiveness and we've been asked to forgive somebody else. I can remember quite a few years ago, we bought a new car. Well, it was new to us. It was kind of a used car, but new to us. And for me, I was like, it's pristine. It's perfect. At this time, we had like a 5-year-old. And I was like, no crackers in the car. No candy in the car. No juice in the car for sure. Like, these aren't leather seats here. You know, it's like, we're going to keep this car perfectly clean. And it worked for about a day, you know, and then the kids, like, they got snacks, and Michelle would be like, hey, I had to give them granola bars on the way to church. I'm like, no, you didn't. Kids don't need to eat. They're fine. They can eat somewhere else. You know, I was like, my kids are going to ruin my car. But it actually wasn't one of the kids that made the first mistake with the car. Actually, I was at coffee with a friend, and I didn't have that car. I had our other car, and I'm sitting there, and I get a phone call, and I pick it up, and it's Michelle, my wife. And Michelle says, hey, don't be mad. I don't know if you said don't be mad, but it was kind of that tone. You know, it was like, hey, you know that new car we just got? Well, I kind of hit it against something. And I was like, you what? And she's like, yeah, so what happened is she was trying to pull into our garage, and it was kind of a tight turn in, and so she just accidentally took the curve a little too tight and just hit the side of the garage with the side of the car. So not only is our car dented, our garage is also broken a little bit. And I'm like, awesome, great. You know, trying to be like, I was with a friend, and I hang up, and I'm like, dude, you're never going to believe this. And he's like, hey, let it go. I remember him saying, just let it go, man. And I was like, I don't want to let it go, though. Like, it's my new car. Like, how could you do this? And of course it's a mistake. And I immediately actually thought back to the mistakes I had made with our other cars, where I had backed into somebody in a parking lot with my entire family. If you guys have ever done that, that was fun. I also, coming home from church on Mother's Day a few years prior, backed up our other car into somebody as I'm trying to leave to go home to care for my wife and be like, hey, let's have a good Mother's Day. I'm like, hey, by the way, I backed into somebody. I got to deal with insurance. And like, we all make mistakes, right? Those are silly, simple mistakes. It's like, it's fine. It's not a big deal. We have to let it go. But there are other things in our lives that are not that easy to just be like, you know what, you dented my car, or you know what, it's okay, I can forgive you. There are things where we have a hard time saying, I forgive you for, right? And if our default is to say, I can't forgive you with the little things, it's going to be so much harder with the big things. But no matter how good you are, how natural forgiveness might feel for you, there are things that you're saying right now, Jonathan, I don't know about forgiveness in this area. Yeah, sure, most of the things, 95%, I'm good, but this thing over here, I don't know about that. And that's what we're actually going to look at today, because especially if we've been deeply hurt, we've gone through what we would say are unforgivable things. It's not just how can I forgive, it's more like why should I forgive, right? Sometimes I know how to forgive. It's like, oh yeah, just say I forgive you and move on. But why? Why should I even do that? Because this person hurt me so bad, or this situation happened, and I can't ever get over that. Maybe you're finding yourself there right now. And you're not alone. I think all of us have those things in our lives where we say, I don't know if I can actually forgive. And God's word obviously has much to say on forgiveness, both the why of forgiveness and the how of forgiveness. So we're going to be in Colossians 3 today. So if you guys have your Bibles, we're going to look at this first one another and look at how and why should we forgive. Colossians 3:12, Paul says this to the Colossians. He says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. See, Paul doesn't actually start with forgiveness. He starts with something else. He starts with the clothes that you're wearing. He says what you're wearing matters. In fact, he says clothing ourselves with the character of Christ is what enables us to walk in forgiveness. That when we are clothed with the character of Christ, we're actually going to find that forgiveness comes much more naturally. Not to say it's easy, but it becomes more natural. In verse 12, we're reminded of who we are as followers of Jesus. See, our clothes matter. He says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved. Before he even gets to what should you do, he reminds you of who you are. He says, you are God's chosen people. You are holy and dearly loved. Friends, if you've placed your faith in Christ, whether that was last week or it's been decades now, you are loved by God. You are chosen by God. You've received now a new identity. You're Jesus's. You're not anybody else's. You belong to Christ, chosen, holy, and loved. No matter your past, no matter what you did today or yesterday, you are still Jesus's. That's the beauty of the gospel. You are holy and loved in his eyes. This new identity as a child, this is actually what enables new behavior. Your new identity, it enables new behavior. Right? Now that you are a child of God, you are able to act differently than you did before. If you've ever given your life to Jesus, you know, before Jesus, I was like this. Now after, it's different. There's something about Jesus that changes everything. And so with this new identity, then comes a new set of clothes. Compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, all these things that Paul lists here, these actually aren't just a random list of nice things. These are actually the character of Christ. Right? Think about Jesus. If you were to say, someone was like, hey, can you describe Jesus to me? You wouldn't be like, oh, he's hateful, he's not very nice, like he's always judging people. It's like, would you describe Jesus like that? No, we describe Jesus like he is loving and compassionate and kind and humble and gentle and patient. You see, Jesus' character that he has, he says, is actually now our character that we're supposed to put on. Now, if you know anything about yourself, if you're self-aware enough, you know I actually don't carry all those things all the time, right? I'm not always gentle. I'm not always patient. I'm not always kind. But I am called to live like Christ. I am called to seek the things that Christ wants me to seek. And now his character is what's supposed to be our character. So what you wear represents who you are. It's kind of like a military uniform, right? If you see someone in an army fatigues, you know that that person's part of the army. Or if they're in the Navy, they're part of it. You see their uniform. The uniform tells you who they are, or service workers or first responders. Even like out in the public sector, we see there are certain people that have like their clothes that they wear all the time. I think of Steve Jobs. If you guys know anything about Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, what did he always wear? He wore a long sleeve black turtleneck. That was just his uniform. And you know, oh, that's Steve Jobs. He's the owner of Apple. He's the guy that started it all. There's something about what we wear that we identify with. When I was a kid, I actually went through a season, which was a fantastic season, by the way, of wearing sweatpants all the time. Maybe you're in that season now. Like, good for you. Man, I wish I could still wear sweatpants all the time. But I did, and I had these red Alvin and the Chipmunks sweatpants. They were like bright red with like a yellow Alvin like on the side, and it said Alvin down the other side. They were the coolest sweatpants, and I wish I still had them. Of course, I couldn't fit in them. I was like 10, but still, if I could, I would. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I would wear. And I thought, Jonathan's just a sweats guy. That's just who I am. Now, obviously, it's like, oh, no, I wear these kinds of clothes, or I do these things. Like, I identify with my clothing. But it's the same with our spiritual lives, right? Like, what you put on the outside, people begin to identify you as, oh, you're that kind of person, or you're that kind of person. And I want to be identified as someone who's kind and loving and gentle and patient. But the thing is, it's not something you can just put on. It's not actually clothes that you can put on, right? It's spiritual. It has to be something that has to be given to you, but it has to start with a desire for this. We are to wear the clothes that represent who we belong to. And like I said, it's not just an action, but it's a result of a new spiritual reality. Paul actually tells us about this in the beginning of Colossians 3. He says this, Colossians 3:1. He says, "Since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things." Friends, the life we have is not based on the world. It's actually based on a spiritual reality with spiritual implications. We have been raised with Christ. Now, this is a drastic change from I was this way, I've been raised with Christ, and now I look differently. And the implications of this new spiritual reality is that we're not supposed to set our minds on things right in front of us, but instead the things above. Look towards the spiritual reality. And Paul's actually just really quoting Jesus here. Jesus says this in Matthew 6. He says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal." Paul is essentially picking up Jesus' call here. He says, remember who you are and live like that. Live with a bigger reality. Live with what is true in the future so that I can determine what you do now. So what does all this have to do with forgiveness? Because I haven't used that word yet. Well, it has everything to do with it, because forgiveness is not an earthly act. Forgiveness is not an earthly act. In your own, you cannot forgive well. And you know this because you've tried, haven't you? And it doesn't work. And it keeps coming back again and again and again. It's not a physical act. It's not an earthly act. It's actually a spiritual act. Forgiveness is a spiritual act. It's an intentional choice that then is empowered by Christ. So that's why we start with that statement that clothing yourselves with the character of Christ, it enables you to walk in forgiveness. So the question is, what clothes are you wearing? As you think about forgiveness today, start with, what am I choosing to put on? How am I being shaped and formed? Who is shaping and forming me? And if it's not Jesus, then forgiveness is going to be really hard for you, which it already is, no matter what. But when we have Christ, we will look different. And the thing is, when you look different, you've experienced this. If you've been out in the world, people will ask you, is there something different about you? See, this has happened a couple times in my life when I've been out and about and just interacting with people, and I'm walking in forgiveness or gentleness or something, and someone's like, there's something different about, what is it about you? It's happened maybe a couple times in my life. You know who happens to all the time? My wife. She works in this secular setting, and constantly people are like, what's different about you? What? You're so kind. They literally call her their team sunshine, right? Like, she's part of that, and she's like, it's not, nice personality, I love you, but it's more than that. It's Jesus shining through her. And it's the same thing with us, that when we live with Christ, being transformed with the clothing of Christ, we look different to the world. So when we are different, we will walk differently. Once we clothe ourselves with the character of Christ, once we say, Jesus, I need your help, I need your clothes, I need that spiritual reality, we then need to move to the second reality about forgiveness. And that is this, that we forgive because forgiveness is the only path towards real healing and lasting peace. It's the only path. It's not a path. It's not an option. It's the only path if you want lasting peace and real healing. Verse 11, Paul says this in Colossians 3. He says, there is no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all, and Christ is in all. Bear with each other, verse 13. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. It is inevitable that we are going to walk into things where we have to forgive. It's inevitable. Every single day there's things that you're like, I got to forgive that. I got to put up with that. We're going to experience hurts and confusion and pain. It's what's in our nature. It's part of the world that we live in. But we're never going to experience real peace and healing when we hold on to our differences. When we look at people and say, they're different than me, I don't know if I can get along with those people, or they're those people over there. When we other people, we make them other than us, there's never going to be any healing in our lives or in our church. This is actually what Paul is talking about here. In verse 11, he lists all these different people, right? He talks about people, the Gentiles or Jews. And if you were here through our Galatians series, you know there was a massive divide. The Gentiles were like, we're free in Jesus. We don't have to have all the old laws. And the Jews were like, no, you have to have all the old laws in order to be in Christ. Like they're coming together and they're constantly clashing. He talks about the circumcised or uncircumcised. He talks about barbarians or Scythians. The barbarians were basically just like the really bad Gentiles. And the Scythians were like the even worse Gentiles. And he's like, you're getting all of these people together. You've got slaves and free people coming together. Like, imagine that power dynamic. Right? If I'm a free person and I'm hanging out with a slave, but they're in my church, I'm like, I have so much more authority and power because I'm not a slave. I'm free. Right? There's so much that's going on in the book of Colossians. I wish we had time to unpack it all. But what essentially he's saying is that we are all going to come together and we have to find room to bear with one another, to be with each other. These several groups of people, as we look at, do you identify with any of those people? Where you look at people around you, or maybe people sitting next to you, or maybe people in your family, and you're like, they're the barbarians. Look at the person next to you. Be like, you're the barbarian. Of course we have people, right? People were like, I don't understand this person. I don't get along with that person. Right? Maybe we wouldn't call someone a barbarian or a Scythian because it makes no sense to us, but we'd be like, oh, that's a Republican, or oof, that's a Democrat. You ever done that in your church or in your family? Or you said, well, they're the charismatic ones, or they're the ones that are too stuck in their ways. You see, there are things that we have differences about. When we come together in this church, we bring our differences and we bring who we are and we just put it on display, and then we're asked to okay, I'm different than you. How do we get along? And Paul is addressing this directly. And what does he say about these people? He says, what do you need to do with them? Verse 13, he says, bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone. And that phrase, bear with, that he says there, it really just means to restrain yourself from your natural reaction to a difficult person, which I love that phrase. What is your natural reaction to a difficult person? Mine's usually exasperation. Ugh, really? That's my response. I don't know what yours is. But essentially what Paul's saying here, when he says bear with one another, he's saying you've got to just let it go. It makes me think of Frozen. Just let it go. That's what Paul's saying, right? It sounds easy. Just let it go. If you have any grievance against someone, just let it go. And 90% of the time, we can get there, right? I think about my boys, right? They're at the age where they're just constantly bickering and fighting. But an hour later, 5 minutes later, it's like water under the bridge. You know, they go up and down and they learn to just let it go. It's not a big deal. It's fine. But there's about 5% of the time where we experience something that we're not just able to let go. Right? Where we're like, that's way more than just they're different than me. This person hurt me. This person lied to me. This person cheated me. This person somehow took advantage of me. And when we experience that, we listen to Paul and we're saying, no, we can't bear with one another. We can't put up with one another. That's not possible. It's literally not possible, Paul. I don't think you know what you're talking about. To forgive becomes so much harder, seemingly impossible, when there are things that have happened in our lives that have hurt us more deeply than we could ever put into words. And you're like, Paul, are you saying that I need to just give over it? Just be over it? Just figure it out? No. When we're wronged, this idea of forgiveness, it's actually like a financial word. So to forgive something, it actually, when we have someone that owes us something and then we say we forgive it, we're just saying you don't have to pay the debt anymore, right? That's a financial term. But for us, it's creating a moral debt. When somebody wrongs us in some way, there's a moral debt now. Like, you did me wrong, so you owe me, right? There's a debt that you owe. And we actually sometimes feel justified then. If the thing is hard enough, we're justified in making that person pay, right? Either through revenge, I got to get revenge on that person, or gossip, I got to talk bad about that person because they need to know, and people need to know what they did, or our passive-aggressive behavior. Any of you passive-aggressive like me? You wouldn't say it, but you're looking at me, you're thinking it, I know. Passive-aggressive. Or physically, we want to get back at people. We literally are like, I'm going to fight this person. Or financially, we want to make them pay in some way, right? There's always some sort of retribution when we're harmed. We're like, we are owed something. It's what's fair. But in every situation, we actually have a choice. We have a choice to actually say, you owe me, but I'm not going to make you pay. Most of the time, we're like, you owe me and you better pay me, because that's what's going to make it right. But the choice is, do we forgive or do we hold these people to task? Do we truly take Paul's statement here in verse 2 where he says, set your mind on things above, not on earthly things? And when I hear that, when I hear this idea of setting our minds on things above, I think, again, that's not a physical act that I can just do. That's a spiritual transformation that has to happen in my heart. Because what I know is that forgiveness is not easy. And I hope you don't hear that from me today. It's easy, just forgive. No, if anything, it sometimes feels impossible. But when we live in our old clothes and we're trying to find our way to forgiveness on our own, we're never going to get there. That's why we have to put on the clothing of Christ. It's Christ in us. And when we do that, we have to actually believe that forgiveness is the only path towards real healing and lasting peace. If you're holding on to something right now, big or small, you know that you don't have peace. And if you're asking, well, how do I find peace? Well, it's actually through forgiveness. It's not the answer you want. What you want is, because once they pay me and they get it back and we're all squared up, then we'll be fine. I won't think about it anymore, I'll let it go. But that's not what's going to happen, right? Right? Somebody may make it right for you, and you're still going to have a hard time forgiving them. Because no amount of asking for forgiveness or doing it's never going to fully free you if you're not able to walk in forgiveness. Maybe today you're asking, but what if I don't want to forgive? Because I'm sure there's some of you in here, you're like, I hear it, that's great most of the time, but what if I don't actually want to? Like they don't deserve it, and I don't want to do it. Well, that I can't actually tell you what to do. None of us can actually just make ourselves forgive, but it does help to remember it's not a physical act. It's a spiritual act. God, can you help me forgive? I heard the story once of Corrie ten Boom, who was a woman who was taken into concentration camps, and she saw her sister and her father and her mother and everyone get murdered at this camp, literally put to death, and she's the only one that escaped. And decades later, she's speaking at a church. And as she's speaking at the church, she'd become a Christian in this time, and she's talking literally about forgiveness. At the end of the message, a man walks up to her, and he comes up to her and he says, Fraulein ten Boom, I was a guard at the camp that you were at. I found Jesus, and I want to ask for your forgiveness. And do you know what Corrie ten Boom said? She said, I can't forgive you. But she says, give me your hand. She grabs his hand and she says, I can't forgive you, but God can. And through him, I am going to be able to forgive you. If she can walk in that kind of forgiveness, she's not excusing what happened. She's not saying, it's okay, don't worry about it. No, she experienced horrific things at this hand of this gentleman. But she was able to forgive because she said, it's got to be God through me. That's what it looks like to walk in freedom and lasting peace. So how do we walk in forgiveness? What does this look like? Well, the last point that I have is that we can know and we can forgive when we remember that Christ chose to forgive us. In fact, this maybe should have been my first point. We can forgive because Christ has forgiven us, right? That's how we can do this, is walk in forgiveness. Verse 13, Paul says, forgive as the Lord forgave you. He doesn't say forgive and then the Lord will forgive you. He says, forgive as the Lord has already forgiven you. In fact, he probably could have put it in the present tense, forgive as the Lord continues to forgive you. Because if you're anything like me, every day, every minute, I need forgiveness for something. There's some way that I have hurt others. There's some ways that I've walked away from God saying, God, I want to do it on my own. I'm good. I got this. But many people actually struggle with the idea that we need to be forgiven. You might be one of those people. You're like, I haven't done anything that bad. Like, I haven't murdered anybody today. Like, I haven't stolen anything. Like, I'm doing okay. Like, what does it mean I have to be forgiven? But if we can never acknowledge that we have deficits in our lives that we owe to God or to others, and that those deficits, those have been forgiven, we're never going to be able to turn around and forgive somebody else. In fact, we become like the man in Jesus' parable in Matthew 18. In Matthew 18, Peter, one of his disciples, comes to Jesus, and he asks Jesus this simple question. He just says, Jesus, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? I think it's so interesting that Peter wants to put a number on it. In fact, he even guesses. He's like, let me just put how about 7? 7 times? That feels like a lot. Like, if you were to forgive somebody 7 times in a row, wouldn't you think, like, that's a lot? I'm good, right? Maybe Peter's like, yeah, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on you. Fool me 7 times, shame on me now. You know, he's like, I've gotten to the point. It's too much. And Jesus takes this question, and instead of saying, yes, Peter, that's very good, he says, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. You see, Jesus isn't actually saying 77 times and then you're off the hook. Some translations even say 70 times 7, which would be a lot more than 77. But either way, Jesus is not saying it's this exact number. What he's saying is whatever you think is enough for forgiveness, it's never enough. Because you will have to constantly, always, forever keep forgiving people. Because that's what Jesus has done for us. See, he's telling them this because he knows that's the only way to freedom and true peace. But honestly, when I hear that, I think that maybe Jesus never actually had to forgive someone. Because after a couple times, I'm like, that's good. I've done my due diligence. Like, I've forgiven. I need to walk away. But then I think that that's not true. Jesus has had to forgive lots of people. In fact, Jesus had to forgive Peter for denying him in front of everybody else. He had to forgive his disciples who ran away from him. He had to forgive Judas, who literally betrayed him to his death. And when Jesus is up on the cross and he's looking at the people who caused his death for no reason other than that they hated what he was about, what did he say? He said, Father, forgive them, because they don't know what they're doing. See, Jesus forgave people, and he's asking us to do the same. To illustrate this idea of forgiveness in this passage of Matthew, Jesus actually talks about this parable. And I'm just going to read it because I think it's a great read, and we're going to talk about what it means. But in verse 23 of Matthew 18, he says this. He says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. And at this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him. He canceled the debt, he forgave him, and he let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins, just like a pittance of money. And he grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me and I will pay it back. The same words that the servant used. But he refused. Instead, he went off and he had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and they went and told their master everything that had happened. And what goes on is the master goes to the servant and he says, you wicked servant, I forgave you so much and you can't turn around and you can't forgive a little bit of somebody else. And he throws him into jail. As I read this story, I think that is the most ridiculous story of my life. If I had ever been forgiven that much, wouldn't I turn around and forgive others? Like that's just, of course I would. But I don't. Because I've been forgiven a lot. I don't know about you guys, but I've done some bad things in my life. I've done some things that I need to ask serious forgiveness for. And I've received it. People have forgiven me. And I turn around and I look at others and I'm like, I can't forgive you. You hurt me. You don't understand what that cost me. And yet what Jesus is trying to say here is that if the master, God in this parable, if the master is the one that can forgive this incredible debt, who are we to not be able to forgive our neighbor or our friend or those that hurt us? You see, when we choose not to forgive, we're actually walking with blinders on. We're forgetting what God has done for us. Again, not easy, not that it's just a natural thing, but we're not even paying attention to the fact that God forgave me. God forgives you. Essentially, I'm putting myself as a higher tribunal than God. I'm like, well, God can forgive all these people, but I'm the one that gets to choose. Do I forgive or do I not forgive? Only when we truly understand God's forgiveness can we walk in forgiveness towards others. So the question today is, who do you need to forgive? Because each one of us, we have somebody or many people that we need to forgive. And for some of you, it may be a simple thing as, that person said something that hurt my feelings. I need to forgive them. For others of you, you're thinking, I've been hurt seriously. Like, Jonathan, you don't even understand what people have done to me. Those are the people that God's saying, even in that, how can you walk towards forgiveness? What does it look like? Felicia Sanders was the mother of one of the 9 victims killed in a shooting in Charleston in 2015. It was a church shooting. And there was a courtroom, and they convicted this guy of all these things. And during the courtroom hearing, she walked up to the shooter. She had an opportunity to literally look at him. And this is what she said during his sentencing. She said this. She said, I forgive you. I know that you don't understand that, but God requires me to forgive you. So I forgive you. This is radical forgiveness. I can't even imagine. Like, I would never, right? I'm like, I don't think I could ever do that. And I'd imagine if you got the chance to sit down with Felicia and say, Felicia, why did you do it? Is it just because you just wanted to get over it and get past and just be like, you know what, I want to put it out of my mind? My guess is that she would say no. It's because God forgave me. And he asked me to forgive. Even in the hardest, worst moments, he's asking me to forgive. Today, I don't have the answer for maybe your question of when is it too soon to forgive? Or how can I forgive that thing or that person? Or what if it just keeps, I don't know what to do, but I do know that God calls us to forgive. What's interesting as I was reading about Felicia and what happened is that she and some of these church members, they chose to forgive this person, but many people didn't. In fact, many people in their community were like, we need to raise that. Like, this is just part of the systemic problems of our society. Like, this keeps happening over and over and over. And if we forgive, we become weak. And if we become weak, people are going to take advantage of us. And if people keep taking advantage of us, then we're never going to get out of this cycle that we're in right now. Now, I'm not saying that's a wrong view, but what I am saying is that it's a view that's focused on the pragmatism. It's got to be okay. I got to make it right someday. It's got to be fair someday for me. And yet God still calls us to forgive. Quick note on this. Forgiveness is not just passive permission. And I feel like I have to say, anytime I talk about forgiveness, sometimes there's that thing, but does that mean I just keep allowing bad things to happen to me? And no. If you're in an abusive relationship, forgiving that person doesn't mean you should stay in that relationship, right? If you've been harmed by someone, it doesn't mean you need to have a relationship with that person. Forgiveness is not necessarily reconciliation. When reconciliation is possible, that's when two parties come together and they both say, hey, we forgive, we find a way. But when reconciliation isn't happening, forgiveness is your part. Reconciliation is God's part that he gets to do through you. But we are called to forgive without continuing to open ourselves up to the bad or unhealthy relationships or situations. But really what forgiveness is it's internal. You know, I heard it said once that forgiveness, when we don't forgive, it's like we're drinking poison, looking at somebody else and being like, I hope that person dies. We're swigging that poison. Oh, man, I hope this person dies. This hurts so bad. I'm going to keep drinking it, and I hope they die. It doesn't work like that, right? They need to drink the poison in order to die. But we're the ones that are actually poisoning ourselves. So today, friends, can we forgive? Yes. Is it easy? No. Does God call us to forgive one another? Yeah. So remember, clothing ourselves with the character of Christ enables us to walk in forgiveness because it's Christ's character formed in us. Forgiveness, then, is the only path towards real healing and lasting peace. If you want peace, you have to walk in forgiveness. And then lastly, you can forgive when you remember that Christ chose to forgive you. And today, we all have something that we're holding on to. And I was thinking about this. I was actually going to bring a giant filing cabinet, but I couldn't find one in time. So this is what you get. You get a bunch of papers. All of us have a folder or a filing cabinet full of things that people have done to us. You're just flipping through it. You're like, oh, yeah, I remember when that, do you remember this one? Oh, my, and you're just flipping through and you're going through it and you're like, man, I remember all of these things. But forgiveness is like pulling that out and looking at it and saying, okay, I forgive this. And it's literally tearing it up. And you're saying, I'm not maybe going to be able to forget, but I can do what I can to forgive. And you just throw it. And you keep doing that over and over and over. You take paper after paper and paper, and you go through, and there are things that are easy. That was an easy tear. There are things that are hard. You're like, oh, there's so many things to forgive in this. I can't. And you tear and tear and tear until finally you look at this, and you're like, there's less papers in here. Now, is it completely empty? No. Because there's always something you're going to have to forgive. Jesus says 70 times 7, 77 times. You got to continue to walk in forgiveness. But if you want freedom, if you want healing, if you want to stop carrying around those massive filing cabinets of grievances against other people, as Paul says, we have to bear with one another. We have to forgive one another. Why? Because Jesus forgave us first. And that's where it all starts. And so today as we close, I just want you guys to close your eyes. And I want you to think about your filing cabinet or your green folder, or whatever it is that you have in your heart. What's in there right now? The only way to know sometimes is to ask God, God, what am I holding on to? maybe right now there's something that comes to mind and you're like, I cannot. I absolutely cannot. Then you can pray the prayer of Corrie ten Boom. God, I cannot. But can you? Say, God, I can't let this go. God, would you let it go? As we close in worship, we're gonna have an opportunity. We'll have the prayer team over to the side, and this might be your opportunity as we're closing to just think about, God, who is it that I'm not able to forgive? What is it that I'm not able to forgive? And God, can you help me? Because he can. Maybe today there's actually people that you need to seek forgiveness from. I would encourage you, go talk to them. Say, would you forgive me? Maybe you need to forgive others. You can go to them and say, I forgive you. But wherever it is, God, I pray that through the power of your Holy Spirit, through the reality that we are made new, that we have new clothes, through the fact, Jesus, that you have forgiven us so much, God, would you enable us through your Spirit to forgive those who hurt us? And would we be people, God, that don't keep long accounts, but we would keep short accounts, God, because what we do with one another, how we treat each other, God, it matters. Would you help us to experience freedom, true and lasting peace, and healing through forgiveness, Jesus? We pray these things in your name. Amen.
Church, can we stand together as we sing this last worship song? Light of the world, you step down into darkness. Open my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you. Hope of a life spent with you. So we sing, here I am. So here I am to worship. Here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Oh, King of all days, oh, so highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Humbly you came to the earth you created, all for love's sake he came for. So here I am. So here I am to worship. Here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. And I'll never know how much it cost to see my sin upon that cross. And I'll never know together lovely, all together worthy, all together wonderful to me. So here I am. Here I am to worship. Here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me.
Anyways, there we go. Before we close, I do actually want to just a couple things. One is if you are struggling with forgiveness and you don't know what to do with it, we would love to pray with you. We've got a team right over here every single week, but today especially, there's some things maybe that you just need. You're like, I need prayer for this. I need prayer for forgiveness or to be forgiven or learn how to forgive. We want to pray for you. And speaking of prayer, we actually have an opportunity coming up Wednesday, starting this Wednesday, where we're going to begin praying together as a church. We're going to be praying at 9 to 10 a.m. every Wednesday in this building. And I know for many of you, you got jobs, you're working at 9 a.m., totally get it. But you can set an alarm, 9 a.m., and pray with us. Because we were thinking about this as a church, and I want to read just out of 2 Chronicles really fast. God is speaking as they're dedicating the temple to the Lord. And God says to them, he says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. What God is saying is he's saying, when my people seek me, I will respond. You see, when we seek God, he responds to us. And we want to seek as a community God together. So every single week, starting this Wednesday, we're going to be here 9 a.m. Come and join us if you can. If you can't, this may grow into more. We'd love to do more opportunities to pray because we don't want to just be a church that prays. We want to be a praying church. We want prayer to be the bedrock of everything that we do because we know that God's not going to move if we don't pray. So join us if you can, 9 a.m. this coming Wednesday. Before you guys go too, if you would just hold out your hands to receive a blessing. And friends, today I pray that you would understand and receive God's forgiveness. That if you don't know his forgiveness, that you would receive it. That if you've experienced it before, that you would experience it again. And that the forgiveness of Jesus would empower you to go and to forgive those that in your own strength you cannot forgive. I pray that you would be empowered by the Holy Spirit. I pray these things in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Friends, thanks for